Happy Families podcast. It's the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now.
How inspiring it is to hear from a parent who's saying, we just want more margin in our lives and we're actually going to make a change to try to create that.
And now here's the stars of our show, my mum and dad.
Hello, this is Dr. Justin Coulson. I'm the author of a bunch of books about raising happy families and the founder of happyfamilies.com.au. And this is the Happy Families podcast. I'm here with Kylie, my wife, and mum to our 6 daughters. Kylie, we love it when we get requests from people to help them out with some parenting challenges and sticky situations about raising kids. And one came through that captured you so much that you said, we're not doing what we were supposed to do today. We're going to do something else instead. So what is it that somebody has emailed us via podcasts at happyfamilies.com.au that you just had to talk about today?
Well, actually, I have to correct you because she didn't email us. It actually came up as a post on our premium page.
Oh, so if you're a Happy Families member, you get access to a premium Facebook page, and this person has contacted us there. My mistake. So what did she say? What's her name?
Well, she told me that she totally adored both of us. So that was the first plus.
Okay, well, that's probably more for you, but that's fine. We'll go with that.
So she called my attention. First up.
That's a way to get a personalised response on the podcast, isn't it? Let's actually say how much. Let's just suck right up to Justin and Kylie, say how awesome you are, and then they're going to talk about us. So what's going on with what's her name?
Her name is Crystal.
How many kids she got?
She has 4 kids, aged 7, 5, 2 and 9 months old.
Wow, so a really young family. Okay.
Very young family. They've been living in Sydney with all the hustle and bustle that comes with Sydney life, long hours at daycare, working, lots of hours, the hustle and bustle, strict budgeting, small house with no budget left.
Yeah, well, in Sydney,
end.
I think I said this on the podcast the other week, it's like $44 million for a 2-bedroom shack now. So.
And so they've recently decided that they're going to leave Sydney. They need more margin in their life as a family and their budget.
Right. Yep.
And so they've decided to move to Canberra. They've got some connections down there already with church communities and families in the area that they know.
Oh, great.
So they're excited about it. And when they told the kids, their 7-year-old obviously became quite upset. He's got a great group of friends at school. The connections there are strong. And obviously there's some anxiety about what's going to happen. I'm leaving behind and what's going to be there at the other end. And so now, as a mum, she's starting to have anxiety about their decision and wants to know if she's making the right decision.
Wow. So we've been through this.
Well, that's why she actually caught my attention, not because she told me I was awesome.
Right. Okay. All right. So she's aware that we've been through this from the podcast.
She is. She mentioned that she'd heard on one of the podcast episodes that we've done an interstate move. We've done a few of them over the years. Her 2 main questions that she wanted us to answer were, how did you support your kids with the change, and how did you discern it was the right move? And as I was thinking about all of the things I could tell her, I just didn't feel like I could do it justice in a little post. So here we are today. We're going to answer those questions.
Full podcast episode for you, Crystal. The first thing that I reckon is worth highlighting is just how inspiring it is to hear from a parent who's saying, we just want more margin in our lives and we're actually going to make a change to try to create that. We're going to go for a slower paced life. We're going to change our living situation substantially so that we can spend more time with our family. And I really think that the extra intention there is really, really desirable. I'm so pleased to hear that. It's inspiring. The other thing that's worth highlighting, just thinking about Crystal's situation, is she said that it's the 7-year-old who's really oppositional or anxious about this. And that's because older kids struggle the most. All children want predictability. They thrive on predictability. But older children have the most to lose. They've got the deepest roots. It's kind of like if you're walking through the garden and you see a weed, it's pretty easy to pull out. If you see a sapling, you're going to have to do a little bit of maneuvering and maybe even some digging to get it out. And once you see a tree there, my goodness, those things, you need to call in people to help you do the job. Once we've got a 7-year-old, we're not talking about a little weed anymore. We're talking about a sapling. It might be a few centimetres, maybe even 10 or 15 centimetres thick, and it's hard to get a tree like that out of the ground. And so I get why Crystal would be saying that this is a hard thing, especially for the 7-year-old, and why she would be second-guessing her decision. It's really challenging, and I think that there's a handful of things that parents can do to help their children to navigate a really big move that can be tremendously unsettling.
The first time we did an interstate move, our eldest daughter was 8.
Yeah.
So we were in a very similar situation.
And we sold her on that big time. So we were living in Brisbane. We were moving to Wollongong. It's about a 14-hour drive from one to the other for those who are not familiar with the geography. And no matter how hard we tried to sell it, she was really confronted by it. It was a hard thing to do, to make that move. Fortunately, where we moved, things settled down reasonably quickly. And that's something that research would tend to point to, that younger kids will settle into their new environment with less fuss and they will establish themselves. But that's not to suggest that it will be easy. It's just that it will be easier than big kids. Why don't we come back after the quick break and talk about some specific things that Crystal and her family can do to make this work as smoothly as possible.
It's the Happy Families Podcast.
Imagine a home where discipline got results without anyone having to feel bad or in trouble. The Do's and Don'ts of Discipline is a webinar to help parents set limits with love, compassion and humanity. Find it now at happyfamilies.com.au/shop.
It's the Happy Families Podcast, the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now. And today we are answering Crystal's question from the Happy Families premium membership page in relation to moving. Big decision around whether or not we're doing the right thing.
In relation to Crystal's challenge, the first thing that strikes me is that there seems to be this wavering, and should we give the children more of a voice? I'm all about empowering kids, and anyone who's read my books or listened to the podcast knows that. But when it comes to a family decision like this, I actually think that this is ultimately a parent decision. The parents decide, and that's the decision. The kids don't really get to choose. Parents actually know what's best for the family sometimes, and that's what Crystal and her husband have decided. So they just let the kids know, guys, this is what we're doing. I think, though, that it's really important that they spend time being gentle in the discussions, spending a lot of time exploring what's going on in their children's minds, understanding their worries, and not trying to fix or solve them, not saying, oh, but when we get there, it's going to be this or it's going to be that. It's just about saying, you're really worried about losing your friends. You're really worried about not being able to do these things that we've always done. It's going to be really hard to say goodbye to that, isn't it? And just being okay with the fact that kids are going to grieve. They're going to mourn what they're losing.
Yeah, for me, it's about acceptance and being really open with our children about how we're feeling about it. We might actually be feeling really excited about the new change, but for all of us, there's also that anxiety that's created around having to make new friends. And, you know, as a mum, where am I going to find a good doctor and a dentist and, you know, all of the logistics
new hairdressers, which shopping centre am I going to go to? Where am I going to get discount fruit and veggies like I've been getting where I am now?
And our kids need to understand that we're feeling exactly the same things they are, but in different ways and for different reasons. And I think that as we have those open conversations, it doesn't change things and it doesn't fix how our children are feeling, but it helps them to know that we understand.
Let's move on to the whole empower thing. We do need to empower and say, well, what do you think we can do to make this work? You're not going to say, what do you think we should do about it? Maybe we should just stay here. That's not an option. But you can empower them within the parameters that are appropriate. So you might say, well, what do you think we can do to make our last 8 weeks in Sydney or our last 4 weeks in Sydney the best 4 weeks ever? Or what do you think we can do when we get to Canberra to make moving in there feel really awesome? Or how often do you think we should come back? And what can we do about staying in touch with the people that matter most? So you can empower them to find ways to navigate this within the boundaries, the guidelines, the limits, the parameters that they need to based on the fact that we are actually moving.
One of the things that we've done as we've done the move from Wollongong back to Brisbane is Wollongong has become a favourite holiday destination for us. And so, you know, keeping those friendships alive is really important to us. And we've had to be very intentional about that so that our children know how much we value those relationships.
So, Crystal, there's a few ideas there. There's a couple of other things that really stand out to me. I need to emphasise, expect hate.
We had about 2 years of hate from one of our children in particular. She was one of our older girls and she really, really struggled. It was hard. It was really hard. But we just accepted that that's where she was at and that she had every right to feel that way in that moment. And it lasted a long, long time.
Yeah, I would actually go so far as to say for Crystal that if you're dealing with a 7-year-old, it's unlikely, especially since you've had long-term stability, it's unlikely that you're going to get 2 years of hate from a 7-year-old over this. Their adaptation will happen faster. But for parents who are going through this and they've got older children, expect that this is going to be hard. We really, really copped it. And one thing that I think helped us to get through it was openness. Yeah. And honesty. I remember coming home from a trip one time. I'd flown from Brisbane to Sydney, and then I had to fly from Sydney to Canberra the next day because of the different presentations that I was delivering. As we took off from Sydney and flew into Canberra, we flew straight over the top of Wollongong. It was a crystal clear day. I could see from the airplane window straight down. I could see the lighthouse at City Beach in Wollongong. I could see North Gong Beach. I was looking at Thirroul and Bulli and Sandon Point, and I could see Mount Kira and Fig Tree, the suburb that we lived in. I could actually make out the big long street from Chico's, our favourite chicken shop, up to the top of the hill. It was called O'Brien's Road. We lived just around the corner from there, and while I couldn't make out our house, I could see all of these landmarks. And I remember it had only been a couple of months, maybe 3 months since we'd left. And I called you when I landed in Canberra, and I was almost in tears.
You weren't almost, you did.
Oh,
you broke down.
Come on, don't be like that. I don't know that I actually cried, but I was weepy, and I just said, I can't believe we've done this. I miss this place so much. And being able to share that experience with our daughter who was giving us all of that hate, it just helped her know that it wasn't just hard for her, it was hard for everyone, and we were all in this together. It didn't necessarily stop her hating us, but it put a human face on it for her so she knew she wasn't the only one suffering.
Well, over those months, as you know, we made the move and the transition, and life continued to be hard for some time as we started to settle into our new community and new environment. One of the things that I found really helpful was just checking in with the family every now and again and talking about some of the positive things that had come as a result of the move. Sometimes it can be so hard to see that because we're so caught up in our own hurt. And so having those open conversations with one another and acknowledging, you know what, we actually get to spend more time together as a family, or now I get to see my cousins that I haven't seen for pretty much my whole life. I now get to spend time with them more, or whatever it is. And just being able to acknowledge those things, however small they are, is really powerful.
What you're really saying is create connection, create meaning, make the move matter. And I think that the last thing that really springs to mind in this conversation to wrap things up would be that we should just expect that it's going to take a while and that we need to be patient and compassionate with our kids.
I think one of the other things that's really important is to be intentional. You know, if one of the reasons you are doing a move is because you want to create more margin, then it's really important that you actually make the space when you get there.
Yep.
But secondly, if connection is so important for all of us, then we have to be intentional as parents to help our children create the new relationships in their lives. You know, being intentional about having play dates and inviting people to the park, or, having people over for a meal so that you can get to know people. You can introduce new children to your children is really important part of that process.
Let's wrap this up. One last thing. You need to expect that it's going to take a while. Whether they're 7 or 17, moving is hard. The people who say, they'll be fine, kids are resilient, they'll bounce back, that's a really discompassionate response. And it is, we've watched it with our 6 kids. It is hard to make a move. Don't be under any illusions that even though you're doing it for all the right reasons, that it's going to be easy. It won't be.
And even as a mum, if you feel like it's the right thing to do, it's really hard watching your children suffer through that process.
It's one of the hardest things there is, to watch the kids struggle like that. I think that it's really important that we're compassionate. I've talked about this before on the podcast, but I want to share it again. It's one of the most profound things that I've learned as I've studied how we can make our families happier. Compassion means, quite literally, to suffer together. Passion means suffering. Com means with others together. So when we have compassion, we literally suffer with. When our children are suffering because this move has been so hard, it's our duty as parents, because we've moved them, to sit beside them in their suffering and suffer with them. It doesn't mean that we have to moan and groan and put on sackcloth and ashes and rend our clothing and moan and writhe on the ground. It just means that we say to our kids, if this is so hard, I'm right here with you. Give me a hug. Let's figure this out together. And then just sit in that moment with them.
With a tub of ice cream and a dinner.
The take-home message from this is expect it to be hard. Focus really hard on exploring, explaining and empowering. And
be intentional.
And expect a bit of hate.
You're going to end on that one.
We really hope that you've enjoyed the podcast. We hope, Crystal, that it's helped you and anyone else who's in the process of moving. One thing that we know about the COVID-19 pandemic, it has set ablaze the real estate market and people are moving all over the place with their kids. So we hope that there's been a handful of useful ideas to help your family to manage and navigate the challenges associated with fresh starts and new beginnings. We, as always, appreciate the good work of Justin Rulon from Bridge Media. He's our producer, and the great ideas and fabulous guidance that we receive from our executive producer, Craig Bruce. Thank you, Craig. The Happy Families podcast, we'll be back tomorrow with our favourite episode of the week. I'll do better tomorrow. Oh, and next week, I got to tell you, very excited about this. We're going to talk about one of our most popular podcasts last year was What's for Dinner, Mum? And we're going to play around with the winter edition of that and help you to get some inspiration for how to navigate the ups and downs and challenges of mealtime with kids as we move into the colder months, at least here in the Southern Hemisphere in Australia. Plus, we're going to continue the conversations about the challenging, intimate topics that have dominated the news recently, talking with moral philosopher Emma Wood about how to teach kids about intimacy in meaningful ways. That's all coming up on the Happy Families podcast. If you'd like more info about making your family happier, please visit happyfamilies.com.au.